So we did start last week this conversation on Advent conspiracy, and I said we're conspiring, we're planning, we're putting together a plan to do Christmas differently this year, right? And we talk about this every year, but it's not just because we want to do Christmas differently this year. We actually want to create some new habits that will carry us throughout the rest of the year, right? And we're conspiring against the culture. We're trying to push back. But listen, not because the culture is bad, right? Christians are called to be culture makers. We're supposed to bring good into the culture as well. Culture's not a bad thing. But we conspire because culture does what? Culture will invade every space we have, right? There's something from culture that can just fill every piece of our calendar, especially during this season. So we're pushing back not because we think culture is bad, not because we want to hide from culture. We're pushing back for the purpose of creating some space and allowing our attention to be diverted into the places where it should belong. I read this great quote this week from an unlikely source for me. Some of you may know Kirsten Powers. She's an author, a political analyst, and she had an article that kind of sucked me in, and she made this statement in the article. She said, when a sale at Crate and Barrel gets entangled with the birth of Jesus, something has gone horribly wrong. I like that quote, mostly because I don't really want to go to Crate and Barrel. But aside from that, I think she's onto something, right? I think she's onto something that sometimes we're getting things confused in our culture. We're getting sucked in. So this whole conspiring is to kind of push back and to see if we can't get a handle on separating what's really necessary and what's not sometimes, right? So we started last week by talking about how we worship and how can we worship more fully at this time of year. And so we had to define some things, and we had to begin to decide what worship really was. And I told you, if you read the story of Jesus' birth, immediately after he's born, what happens? People start showing up, right? Angels show up, shepherds show up, magi show up eventually. Now that all took place over time, but people started showing up, and they showed up for the purpose of worship, right? And they didn't have a good worship. Nobody left the manger scene because they were thinking, oh, that was listen, the angels sang so well, I really worshiped well, right? The shepherds didn't say that. The angels didn't high-five each other and go, that was a great worship service, like you guys were on pitch tonight, right? The singing didn't make it good worship service. The magi didn't leave there going, man, that was the most intellectually stimulating conversation I've ever had. That was a great worship service. That's not what worship is. They left there worshiping because they had this encounter. And I said to you, one of the problems we have in our culture is this encounter is hard to have. An encounter with Christ is hard to have. Why? Because in our culture, we are number one. We are number one. And I made this statement that when we believe that life is all about us, right, then our worship is going to have to belong to us. If we really believe that life is all about us, like our culture a lot of times will push, then we're going to have to make worship all about us. And when we do that, we evaluate worship by things like this. Was it a good event? Did they have great music? Was it entertaining? Was it intellectually stimulating? See, we start to evaluate worship strictly based on things that matter to us when it's all about us. And so we came up with this thing. We said, look, if you follow the Christmas story, if you follow what happened when everybody started to show up at that manger scene, then what you discover is that worship is all about God. Worship is all about this encounter, right, that we should experience, not some experience that we have to encounter. And so that set the precedent for last week. And so now the question really is, this gets really uncomfortable, right? So how'd you do this week? How'd you do? When it came to being worshipful all week, when it came to having a spirit, an attitude of worship, were you able to walk every day this week with this understanding, with this knowledge, with the presence of God, right? Understanding that he's with you, that he wants a relationship with you. Were you able to walk that way in the week? Because today's not a worship service, right? This is just a service. This is a gathering, a tool that we use, right? To come together, to encourage each other, to spend time focusing on God, and then get ready to go back out and do it all again next week and worship in the lives that God has placed us in. So how did you do last week? And are you ready to do it again this week? Because that's what worship is. So that was how we started this whole series, right? If that's not enough, now we're going to take it a little bit further. And today I want to talk about spending less. Now let me tell you what just happened in the room. when I said spending less and the idea of money came up, a couple of things happen. I can divide the room into sections. I can guarantee it. There are some of you who all of a sudden you wanted to jump for joy. You said, yes, finally the pastor's going to tell my spouse to stop spending money. Right? Don't laugh too much because we're going to get on. We're going to catch on to who's thinking this. Right? Some of you think, yeah, let's talk about money. We're spending too much. We got to rein it in. We got to get it under control. We're buying too many gifts. We buy gifts for the neighbor's cat, and we're tired of this. Some of you, that's what you're thinking, and you're excited about that kind of conversation. Some of you, okay, this is the second group I think in the room. Some of you, a cold shiver just ran down your spine, and you're thinking of all days to come to church. Right, of all days, because all of a sudden the pastor's going to start talking about how we shouldn't be giving gifts, and I just finally got my spouse lined up. I think I'm going to get the gift I really wanted this year. It's not going to be the stuff that everybody thinks I want that I don't really want, but I finally got them figured out, and now I'm going to get the gift I want. Now you're going to tell them not to give me a gift, okay? Relax. Spending less is not about no gifts, okay? So you can relax in the room. It's not about no gifts, but I guarantee you, that's the second group in the room. The third group is this, and this is the one that always concerns me the most, and I think it may be most of us. The third group is those of us who just kind of began to squirm, right? Because money is such a personal thing. It's a hard thing to talk about. And if you listen and watch a lot of the television preachers or the people that get the most play in the Christian circles, it appears, the conversation about money is bizarre. It's always asking for more, right? It's always making me feel bad for what I didn't give. It's always making me squirm because I don't give enough. It's always making me feel like that God only wants one thing for me, and that's my money. So I want to start there this morning, okay? Because money is talked about so much in the Bible that we don't even realize it sometimes. And there's a reason for it, because it is a very personal thing, okay? So grab your worship flyer or your Bible or your cell phone, however you look up the scriptures. And I want to go to Psalm 50 for just a second. We're going to start here. Psalm 50 is a psalm. It's one of 12 that gets attributed to a guy named Asaph. And I'll be brutally honest, we're not 100% sure who that is. But there are these 12 psalms, and we believe it actually could be just a pseudonym, like maybe somebody else David wrote under this name for some reason. We're not sure. But for some reason, there's 12 psalms that get attributed to this Asaph. And here's the thing about these 12 psalms. They deal with the judgment of God and the obedience of God's people. These 12 psalms exclusively labeled to Asaph, that's what they deal with. Now watch what happens is we pick it up in verse 7, Psalm 50. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. You got to know a little bit about what he's talking about. In the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, God required sacrifice, animal sacrifice. And he did it for a purpose. We'll talk about it in a second. But you get to this verse 8 and you realize God is saying, look, I'm scolding you, but it's not because of your sacrifices. It's not for your sacrifices that I'm all up in arms. The ritual of it all, right? This doing what you're being asked to do is not the problem. Keep going. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I love this, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. God looks out and he goes, look, guys, if I'm hungry, not coming to you. Like you just can't even get there with me, right? Like I made you, so how are you going to do better than me? Verse 12, verse 13. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? He's required sacrifice from the Israelites. But now he says, but I don't need them. I don't have to have them. Keep going. Verse 14, therefore, offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High and call upon me in the day of trouble and I will deliver you and you shall glorify me. He says, I want you to be in relationship with me. The sacrificial system was set up for one reason, so that the people of Israel would continually have something that they participate in when they go before God that reminds them, shows them, reflects the fact that they understand that they are not perfect, that they understand that they continually break their vows with God, that they understand that they continually disobey God. That's what the sacrifice was. When you brought the animal to the priest, you would put your hands on the animal, the priest would pray, take the animal, put the animal on the table for the sacrifice, and your sins were going to be transferred to that animal, offered as a sacrifice. God required this. Not because he had to have animals. It's not because he needed us to bring animals, or he needed his people to bring animals. He was requiring something in their walk with him that would continually remind them of their shortcomings, that they weren't perfect, that they kept disobeying him, right? I was thinking this week, if this system was in place today, can you just imagine if God still expected animal sacrifice? First of all, PETA would have a fit, right? And some of you would too, and I get it. Think about sacrificing an animal. Think about what that is. Think about having to have that in your life all the time. That's cruel, right? That's harsh. But God's working with his people, and he's saying, look, I want you to understand the dilemma we're in, the mess that's been created here, the gaping hole between us. And so I'm going to institute this system so that you'll remember, so that it'll set you apart, so that when people see you bring your sacrifice, they're going to see what it looks like to offer yourself before a holy God. That you have to come recognizing who you really are. The other thing I thought about this week when I thought about sacrifices is how politically incorrect it would be today to bring an animal like that, because you're going to say when you bring the animal, I am a sinner, right? And we don't like to say that. We don't like to say that at all. It feels like we're invading that sacred space within each of us, that we're devaluing ourselves. And yet God is saying, it's not about devaluing you. It's about understanding who I am, that I'm that holy, that there's this bridge, this gaping hole between us, and that needs to be bridged. And so right now, this animal is going to represent that you're aware of that, and I will use that to remove your sin temporarily, right? That's the sacrificial system. But in this passage, God says, I don't need that. Like, I don't need you to keep bringing those animals. I don't have to have those. Look, I own all the animals. You're not bringing them to me because I need the animal. You're bringing them to me because I want relationship, right? I thought about this. It's kind of like going to church today. We can settle into a system, right? The Israelites had settled into this system of just bringing their animal, just dropping off the animal. Here's our animal this week. Go do your thing. God, we did that, right? And how do we do that sometimes? When we just attend church. God doesn't need the animals. He doesn't need your attendance. And lastly, he doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your money. The money piece represents something else. It represents a surrender of my life. It represents me letting God into my life. It represents this relationship that we encountered last week when we started talking about worship. Because money is the biggest thing next to our very lives that God gives us to steward. So we can relax. It's not about guilt. It's not about shame. I say this all the time. Around here we talk about equal sacrifice, not equal giving. We get it. Not everybody can give the same amount. So this morning, though, is this conversation in a season where it's focused so much on spending. What does it look like to spend less? And why would we even talk about that? Why would we even talk about that this morning? If you think about our culture and how we like ourselves and we like to be number one, I read a stat this week that I chuckled over, and I don't mean this as a Jesus juke, and you're going to know why I said that in just a second, but it made me chuckle and it made me concerned at the same time. Here it is. Somebody did a study and discovered that the average Christian in this country will give about $800 in 1 year to the church. That's the average. The average. The average Christian will also spend $1,000 or more on a cup of coffee over the course of a year. Now think about that. Jesus just came in second to Java. Okay, there's my Jesus juke for the day. Okay, you can take that, write that, tweet that, whatever you want to do. Just give me credit so it's a bad joke and everybody's going to know that I make bad dad jokes. Jesus comes into Java, right? But that's our culture. That's what we're in. That's what we wrestle with, right? Every week. How do we manage our money? How do we handle things? And why does it matter how we handle things? I love this. I found a quote from Thomas Aquinas, an ancient historian, a church father figure. He said, the things that we love tell us what we are. Right? The things that we love tell us what we are. It's kind of like saying, show me your checkbook and I'll show you what matters to you. So if you don't remember anything else this morning, remember this. How we spend our money reveals who we trust. How we spend our money reveals who or what we trust. How we spend that money is going to tell us who we trust in life. Whether we trust ourselves or we trust somebody else, or we trust the security of what the money can get us, right? Our houses, our cars. Our possessions reveal something about our belief in God. Let me give you a few more stats. These are I think, startling, and these are fresh. These are from this year, from the start of November until November 21st, right before Thanksgiving. The average number of daily hits on the top 100 retail sites on the website, on the global World Wide Web, the total number of daily hits on those top 100 sites averaged 175 million hits a day. Top 100 retail sites, 175 million hits a day. By the way, don't go tell your spouse, hey, listen, you were too many of those 175 million. I need you to back it down. That's not going to go well with you. If you say that, just don't even go there. But so I'm just giving you, this is information. That's all it is. On Thanksgiving, there were over 297 million hits on the top 100 retail sites Thanksgiving Day. There's 50 million people in our country. 297 million hits on the top 100 retail site. Some of you are in retail and you're going, man, I hope my business was in there, right? I mean, I get it. We're conflicted here. The following day, Black Friday, get this, 344 million hits on the top 100 retail sites out on the World Wide Web. The 4-day Black Friday weekend, 137 million of us visited a brick and mortar store. 137 million people got out. I was one of them, okay? You can put me in that number. I'll never do it again, I promise. It's just miserable. The projections for this holiday season, for Christmas, of what Americans will spend, over $717 billion. Billion. Why do we talk about this? Because money is a part of our world. We're not going to stop that. We're not going to stop buying gifts. It doesn't say that Jesus never said, hey, stop buying gifts. If you're a Christian, follow me. No more gifts. Gave that up. No more. But it does reflect in where our confidence is, what we believe in. It reflects in how we worship, how we walk with God. How you spend your money reveals who we trust. I read the story, I'd heard it many times again this week. J.D. Rockefeller, a reporter says to him, how much money is enough? J.D. says, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. Did you know that J.D. Rockefeller died in the early 1900s, is still the second wealthiest man in history? Had over $336 billion when he died. Folks, $336 billion, I don't even know what that is. Like I told somebody last night, I said, I'll take one. Like $1 billion, I got it, right? I could do a lot with $1 billion, right? $336 billion, and a man will say, how much is enough? Just a little bit more. Money tells you something about our lives. Okay, let's spend the rest of the morning in 1 Timothy. If you've got your Bibles, flip over there. Paul's writing to a young man, Timothy, and this is, you're going to read this, you're going to think, well, this is not about money. It is. I think it is. Paul's writing to Timothy, and he's trying to instruct young Timothy in how to be a better shepherd. He's trying to instruct Timothy in how to be a better discipler, how to help lead people to God and teach them and train them. So Paul is heavily saying to Timothy some hard things, saying this is what it looks like to be a disciple and to lead others. And he weaves in some stuff that I think is very pertinent to how we think about money. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain, Timothy. Say it this way. If you want to spend less this year, if you really want to talk about what it looks like to pull things back, to begin to ask God, what does it look like for me to allow you to control my money more, to steward my money in a way that honors God, you have to start by asking yourself, what makes me content? To spend less, you got to start by asking, what makes you content? What is it that satisfies you? I bet if I got on television in front of millions of people and I said, we all know that money will not offer lasting content, I don't think anybody would disagree with me. It's so funny. We'll all admit it. Oh, yeah, money's not going to offer me lasting contentment. But then we treat it like it does. The things we do with it, the things we steward, the way we steward our money will actually sometimes reveal that we really believe it provides lasting contentment, right? And so what do? We go out and we shop for things that are going to make us comfortable. We shop for things that are going to make us more stable, we think, in life. We shop for things that we think are going to help us control our lives better, right? We shop for things that are going to make us happier in life, right? And we use our gift giving to that end. Finding satisfaction, finding contentment in the things that we buy. That's what we do with our money. We had a conversation this week. My wife and I, sometimes it's hard to imagine, but as your kids get older and they start to be around less, the natural thought I had in my 30s and 40s was, oh man, we're going to have so much time together. And now that we are entering that phase, we're looking at each other going, who are you? And I think I know you, right? I mean, it seems like we're busy. So one of the things we like to do is we'll take walks together. That's kind of how we catch up. And we had an interesting week, and my Jeep went down one day. I thought it was just a bad battery, realized the ignition switch was also bad in the Jeep. And so we're walking and we're talking, and my wife says to me, she's always trying to support me and make things easier. She goes, is it time for a new car? In my soul, I would love a new car. Can I just be honest? And what I would like is probably not one you would want me to have, right? Like I would want a really expensive car. In my soul, that's what I want. And we talk about it because I also know something. And this is really personal, and I'm going to tell you my place, but I'm not saying it because it needs to be your place. I'm just telling you me, where I'm at with God. The really personal thing is I have it in my budget to go get the car I want, probably. I do. I have it in my budget to go get the very thing I would drive. But it means I would take my budget from God. It means I would stop giving the stuff I give him right now, that amount. You don't need to know what it is. I'm just telling you, I could do it. I got the money. It's in my budget every month. If I just stop giving it here in this one column for him, the things that he and I have talked about, the things that he has impressed upon me, the things he has challenged me with, if I just stopped and shifted it over, I could have that car. Let's talk about cell phones for a second. This is another hard conversation, right? Most of us, when we go get a new cell phone, sometimes it's because it's necessary. But many of us, including me, have gone and gotten a cell phone when the current cell phone was doing what? Working fine, right? And yet, when I buy the new cell phone, the cell phone that's working fine currently becomes what? The old cell phone. All of a sudden it's old. I mean, it worked fine the day before. It was working the day you bought the new cell phone, but now it's old, it's obsolete, and you punt it to the curb, right? That's how we think. We're in this loop that just keeps us bogged down in our culture. Why? Because I'm number one, I got to have what I want. I got to be able to buy the things that make me happy. And the cell phone is just one small picture of that, is it not? If you want to spend less, you got to start by asking yourself, what makes me content? Where does my contentment lie in life? Now, real quickly, I want to run you through some verses because Paul kind of says to Timothy, here's some things for you to think about when it comes to contentment. And I think it applies even to our finances. So pick it up in verse 7, 1 Timothy 6. He says, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. Now, stop right there because that some of you didn't even know that was in the Bible. You thought that was just your dad growing up, right? Like, and you didn't bring anything into this world. You're not going to take anything out. It all belongs to me, right? Like you kind of thought that was dad's thing. That's Paul talking to Timothy. He says, look, you were born with nothing. And you're going to leave this world the exact same way. But if we have, watch what he says, food and clothing, with these we will be content. Paul is telling Timothy, he's saying, Timothy, you want to shepherd people to know God better? Then as shepherds, here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn to be content with food and water, with food and drink, with the necessities of life. We're going to stop using, what do we say? Man, I really want that, or I really need that. Paul says, Timothy, no. You need food and water. And we're going to learn to be content with that. So if you want to begin to spend less and kind of question yourself on what makes you content in life, you got to start with this. Start by questioning, exploring your own mortality. Start by looking at your life. Where's it going to end? I know nobody knows the day they're going to leave this world, but think about that. We've had plenty of cause for that the past week. You've got to see any part of the funeral with President Bush 41. It was an amazing, amazing couple of days. But that big old train that hauled him to his resting place does what? Goes away now. He doesn't take anything else with him, right? Start by thinking about, look, money doesn't cure mortality. The richest, wealthiest people, Rockefeller, had some of the most money in the world, and he couldn't do anything with it once he left. It didn't extend his life. It didn't save his life. He didn't get to control his world, right? He still left this world, right? But we need to ask ourselves those hard questions. What about your mortality? What do you think about? Where do you want to end up in life? If you can't answer that, you're not going to be content. You're going to continue to allow money to pull you in. Go to verse 9 real quick. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. Notice how he words this. Into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Now, some of you need to underline this, and you need to make sure you go home and put this highlighted in your Bible at home or something, because this verse gets quoted so poorly and misquoted so often. The money is not the root of all evil. The love of money. The thing in me that says I can't be content unless I have more. And by the way, it's not the root of all evil, it's the root of all kinds of evil. Right? So when you fall in love with money, when you start pursuing it, there are things that you're going to do. What? You might lie, you might cheat, you might steal to get more of it. When it's consuming you, when it's something you love, right? It is through this craving, Paul says, that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. They've gotten in trouble over and over again. If you want to discover what makes you content, you have to start by exploring the things that you love. You have to start by asking yourself, what is it that I really love in life? And where does that fall in my world on a daily basis? What is it that I love? What is it that I'm drawn to? And we got to stop, listen, we got to stop hiding behind this. I've been guilty of this. I say, well, I don't have a problem, right? I'm not rich. I don't have a problem with the love of money. The reality is I love all these things that require money to pursue. And I hide from God. And I try to tell him I don't really love money. The reality is I do. I do, because I love all these things that money will get me. And I have to have the money to get there. So oftentimes I'm not content until I have more of it. Or I'm not content until I get it. And if I don't have it, then my life is miserable all week long, right? And the holiday season's the worst because there's ads everywhere about the things that I really need. And by the way, there is apparently a thing that happens in this country where somebody gets up on Christmas morning and there's a bow on a big car out in the front of their yard. I say this every year. The Lexus commercials just hammer me. I don't get it. That hasn't happened to me yet. Maybe it will one day. Maybe it happens to you. Come talk to me about it. I want to hear how good it is. But the bottom line is, are you allowing yourself the hard conversation of what is it you really love? Are you allowing God to ask you those questions? Keep going. Verse 11. So are you looking into your own mortality? Are you allowing God to question the things that you love? This is how you discover what really makes you content in life. Verse 11, Paul goes on. He says, but as for you, O man of God, flee these things. Watch this. Pursue righteousness and godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you were made, the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. If you want to know how to be more content, you got to explore the things you're willing to fight for. You got to explore the things you're willing to fight for, the things that you naturally fight for. Listen, there's things in all of us that we're naturally gravitate towards. There's ways that we're wired and things that God put on us to kind of fight and defend. I was wired to be a Dallas Cowboy fan, and now I'm paying for it, right? I was wired to want to defend the people who are on the fringe. That's part of me. Right? If you find me at a party, sometimes you're going to find me talking to the people that may not get the most play in the conversation because that's kind of how I'm wired. But if you also ask yourself, what is it I fight for? Sometimes we'll be surprised how we fight for things that we don't have to have, right? Do I fight for more overtime instead of family time, right? Do I fight for that next promotion instead of family dinners? What is it you fight for? Do I fight for the things I love more than I fight for my relationships? Do I fight for earning that next degree over spending time with my family in worship? It's a hard question. What is it that you fight for? What are the things you're willing to invest your time in and trust God with? What are you fighting for? How we spend our money reveals who we trust. How we spend our money reveals who we trust, and we can figure out who we can trust, right, by asking ourselves, how are we content in life? What is it that makes us content? I had an interesting week when somebody here at Journey was helping me kind of tweak our Google searches on the web. So that as people go out and look for Christmas Eve services, that maybe they'll find Journey, and so we were improving our visibility by tweaking some things, and I knew within 48 hours it was working, because within 48 hours I'd had 7 phone calls from people asking for money. It's a brutal world. Right? This thing that we keep talking about, this thing that makes us nervous, this thing that makes us squirm, this thing that sometimes we spend too much of and we get in trouble over the holiday season, right? We do this because our culture is pushing us and driving us that direction. And I wish I could tell you that everybody that called me and was asking for help was doing it in a genuine, honest way. But unfortunately, as your pastor, I'm telling you, I have tracked these things, and so many times people that call churches do this on a regular basis just to get handouts. And it's hard because we have limited resources. We can't just give it all away, or we've got limited resources. We're trying to help our own people, and that's why we encourage you to walk in community, to be in a body, because that's where good help comes from. But it makes me think about my own life. And where does my contentment come from? How we spend our money, how I spend my money reveals who I really trust. How I spend my money does reveal who I trust. And so the question is, am I willing to consider my contentment this week? Am I willing to spend less by asking myself what really makes me content? Am I willing to let God in on that conversation? Am I willing to make adjustments? Am I willing to enter that relationship so that I can spend less? Not because I'm trying not to buy you a present, not because you're trying not to buy me a present, but because I'm trying to get to a level of contentment with God that we all know doesn't exist when it comes to money. It just doesn't. How we spend our money reveals who we trust. Let me pray for us.